cool with us, so thank you. Yes, and I hope you're all okay with the recording. It's really helpful to us because we feel like we have such amazing, wonderful women of color leaders with us on these calls. So we like to record them. So I am Yolanda Lindor. I'm a senior program officer here at the San Francisco Foundation, and I just want to welcome you to Lunching with Leaders. Here at the San Francisco Foundation, our vision is that Bay Area women of color leaders thrive in their fullness, they build community power, and they obtain positions of decision-making power and access to allocation of resources. To this end, we are building our Womxn of Color, Womxn of Power Program. For the first phase of this program, we're partnering with the LeaderSpring Center to scale their groundbreaking fellowship program, Lead Strong, that is focused on the leadership of women of color. The program also includes a networking component to help build a regional community of Womxn of Color leaders, and also a component that focuses on the ecosystem, because we know that that's where all the real barriers lie. So we want to make sure that we address that. So hopefully you'll hear a little bit more about this from Sonia towards the end of our program, so that you can hear sort of some current information about that. However, today we see our time here in Lunching with Leaders as an opportunity to hear from an outstanding woman of color leader, mostly from right here in the Bay Area, as our guest is today. And for all of us also to have an opportunity to network and get to know each other as women of color leaders. So today, Dr. Mañjon will be moderating our conversation. My friend and my colleague, Sonia Bashiva Mañjon, PhD, has extensive leadership experience in academia, government, and nonprofit sectors. She is currently the co-executive director at LeaderSpring Center, where both she and her co-ED, Safi Jiro, are proud alumni of their program. She is also a devoted mother to two impressive young men, Zion and Ezra. Personally, I admire and respect Sonia for many, many reasons. And I particularly appreciate her for consistently speaking truth with both grace and wisdom. Sonia.
Thank you, Yolanda, and welcome everyone. I am just so honored to be facilitating this Lunching with Leaders. I wasn't aware of our guest speaker today, Anne E. Price, but I met her, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago when we had a Zoom call, and am just enthralled by her story, by her wit, by her fortitude to move on in the face of adversity. So I want to just start with what's going on right here in our own backyard in California. California is currently investigating Google's treatment of Black women workers. A top AI ethics researcher, Timit Gibru, was forced out by Google because of her ethical beliefs. April Christiana Curley, who was their diversity recruiter, was recently ousted. Some of you may be aware of Black Girls Code founder Kimberly Bryant, who was actually unaware that there was an investigation going on for her removal. And then I was sent the Chronicle of Philanthropy article that stated underpaid Black leader who turned around social justice nonprofit resigns, alleging racial bias from the board of director. And that article was actually written about Anne Price, the co-president and founder of the Maven Collaborative, an organization working to fully dismantle racial and gender inequity within our economy. She was the first woman president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development, from which she was ousted. She served as director of the Closing the Racial Wealth Gap Initiative at Insight from 2011 to 2016. She's an experienced researcher. She's an advocate. She's a trainer. She spent 25 years in the public sector working on a wide range of issues, including child welfare, hunger, welfare reform, workforce development, community development, and higher education. So she is absolutely a powerhouse. And I want to thank you, Anne, for joining us to share your story. So what I find most interesting about your story is that the work that you were doing at Insight was to lift up people of color through research, advocacy, and efforts to shift national discussion around racial economic disparities. Yet, you were the lowest paid leader in their recent history, making 40% less than your male predecessor. Can we start there?
Yes, and thank you so much for that introduction and setting the context for this conversation. This is going to be a conversation about some real truths that have been invisibilized in our nonprofit sector that need to be brought to light, that I know is not just my experience, but that of many others. So, I came in, with the low salary. It took me 2 years to fight just to get one bump up. That still was below my male counterparts, and spent 6 years of my whole entire tenure fighting to increase my pay, to no avail. And I think it really speaks to a couple of issues. One is how we value women, just writ large, in this work, and that we know that there are pay disparities in the nonprofit sector for women leaders. And then, coupled with being a Black woman and just how I was devalued stepping into this position. Someone told me that I'd worked with and said, I think if you don't get a contract from these folks, I don't think you should take this position. I think you should negotiate a contract. And I came in the door not being able to negotiate a contract. And, came in like so many others during a crisis. And so the idea that it was almost a throwaway, right? I mean, I think that this board would have perhaps thought about closing the org. It didn't need to be closed. But I was very, very adamant about the viability of this organization, and was really clear that I could address some of the issues that it was facing. And so, we got to talk right away about how women are devalued, and the fact that folks were just fine with my salary, even knowing what they had just orchestrated for the previous president. So that's where we started.
That's where it started. So we know that through research and through our own experience as women of color, especially Black and brown women, that we're constantly undermined, by boards of directors, particularly when our predecessors are white identifying or male. And in our own research that we've been doing, executive transitions, impact and opportunities, which we will be hosting next week, and we'll put information in the chat for you all, that the story that you're telling is not new. It's not a new story. It's not oh my God, what are they thinking? And when you look at the leaders that have experienced similar circumstances, such as yours, they're powerhouses. Your credentials speak for themselves. So can you talk a little bit about how you were pushed out and by whom? Because, when I looked at your background, it's like they were lucky to have you, as their leader, and for you to have to fight the fight that you fought just to get pay equity, We're not talking about coming in far exceeding what your predecessor was making, but, hey, pay equity, right? So talk a little bit about how you were pushed out and by whom, because I think that's what blew me away when you and I spoke.
Yeah, well, yeah, I came in actually, after leading the city of Seattle's community development block grant program, highly visible, ran a department with 7 people, but also was responsible for 50 people, 7 departments, multi-millions of dollars that came into the city, high profile position. And all of that was pretty much negated as experience of me walking in the door. In fact, I don't think that the board ever really saw my experience as being worthy. In fact, I remember early on, they said, you know what, Ann, you're not a leader, you're a practitioner. As though practitioners can't be leaders, but it was a way to knock me down a peg. And there was always this sense of keeping me in my place, right? That I didn't know my place. So walking into a crisis, 3rd day on the job, I'm dealing with the state bar saying, we're going to pull 43 years of funding from you.
Wow.
Because someone previously, I'm not saying the director, but people on your board, we feel lied to us and we can't trust you. That was my 3rd day. I'd had, folks who had left the org. I did not have the right staffing. I walked into a budget deficit. And so I want to point out something that I think is really important when leaders of color, when women walk into these positions under these circumstances. So the first thing I really wanted to do, well, of course, I had to mitigate this immediate crisis, but I really want to outline a new vision for how to move us from almost a 50-year-old organization to what was needed in this current time. And I think right away it was clear that I didn't have support of that vision. And I think that when leaders come in who are supposed to do all these things, right? They're supposed to raise money, they're supposed to deal with the crisis, they're supposed to, they represent diversity and equity. But once you start to challenge the status quo, then you start to have issues. And I think this distrust of Black women that's so foundational lends itself to the dynamics of distrust when it comes to say, look, I have a vision. I know I can be on this path. So that even decisions I was making, even as we were trying to pull out of this budget deficit, right? And saying, well, you're not really doing anything because you're just cutting costs, right? Every single point was brought with some kind of negation. And so I was in a particular circumstance, which I think is something extremely uncomfortable, which was I was dealing with a great deal of not just sexism, but anti-Blackness. And anti-Blackness by a board that were all people of color. And these are issues we don't want to talk about. We don't want to pretend, we want to pretend like that doesn't exist. But you can be a person of color, you can be Black and be anti-Black. But my board was very split with Latinx folks that were undermining me and Black folks who supported me, not enough, but stepped in at times when it was clear that this board was going to push me out, right? This came under a circumstance where I was able to not just get us out of the deficit, raise money, secure some of the largest grants that the organization had ever seen, have more cash on hand than had ever been seen in any recent time. And I know that because I had a staff person who had been there for 40 years and knew the organization intimately in terms of its financial situation. So all these things were happening. Greater public, visibility. All of these things were happening at a time when I was constantly being questioned about my functioning as a president. I was not allowed to bring on any board members that I thought could help support this vision. Never. I was blocked at every turn. It's a big thing, I think, that we have to think about in terms of accountability. And when a director starts asking her board to be accountable, then you're also going to have issues, right? to try to say these are not the right procedures. You can't come in here and change board minutes because you don't like what was said. That you actually should be meeting. My board didn't meet for 18 months at one point. And part of that was to undermine my leadership, right? There was profound anti-Blackness. There was disgust at pictures of Black people on our website and comments made about it. There were comments made that I was trying to turn this organization into the Urban League. All sorts of things that in any professional setting would be unacceptable. So I was faced with not only trying to bring an organization to fiscal viability, I was also trying to make this a wonderful organization in which for my staff to work for, in the midst of this constant sense of this hovering over my head. At any minute, the shoe was going to drop. I could never really take vacation because there was always some shoe that was going to drop. I was yelled at because I wanted to take the week of Thanksgiving off and told I was not able to do that. It was egregious.
And I think the other thing that we have to realize is that this is not just coming from all white boards, because your board was not an all white board. And so when we start to examine board culture and where that culture comes from and how the assimilation process happens when we do have BIPOC folks on our boards, is that they assimilate into that dominant culture, into that status quo. And I call it the default. You know, anyone that's been born or brought up in this country, there's this default that's patriarchal, it's hierarchical, it's colonial, you know, and if we're not unlearning that, then we will take on those dominant characteristics. And so, you know, there's this saying that, you know, all skin folks aren't kin folks. And I don't know if you want to talk about the person on your board or the characteristic of the person on your board that actually, you know, had the last knife dig in your spine, but was a person of color.
Yeah, it was a person of color. And we have to understand that we are in a white supremacist culture in the nonprofit sector, and whoever is in there, doesn't matter, you're exactly right, can really, really uphold that culture, right? Uphold that status quo. And this idea about who has power. And the reality is our institutions should be built so that no one has outsized power. I should not have had outside power, and either should my board or my board chair, right? This is a system of accountability. Right. And so this idea that I would not stay in line, that I would question, that I would push, that I would challenge, I think that they, you know, there was this like, well, I don't know how she's still here. You know, we're going to wear her down till she wants to leave. And that really was the attitude. To this day, this board has not accepted responsibility, even after the article was published. Did not examine itself, did not change its dynamics, just dug in even harder, even more so. And so I think that if we are going to talk about racial equity out in the world, we've got to think about what's in-house. Right. And we need to think about this issue of anti-Blackness that exists, that we don't want to talk about because it's shameful, is ever present. And really that was a big factor, I think, you know, and the fact that I was a woman. I don't think I would have been treated the same if I were a male. I honestly don't. There had been other male Black presidents. I think that it was really this intersection and this idea that I would not stay in my place. And it was very clear that that's what was the goal. The goal was to keep me in my place.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think there's something about being the first Black woman, first woman of color in a position. It's like folks kind of don't know what to do with us. You know, I've experienced that being the first, you know, in many positions, and you're constantly having to prove yourself because it's like they haven't experienced us. But, we live in the world. And so, that whole notion of, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Is it going to be, up to my standards? It's just the kind of treatment that we don't see our white counterparts experiencing, or even our male counterparts experiencing. So let's transition to where you've landed, because, I really want to talk about the Maven Collective and your vision for the Maven Collective and how you move it forward, coming out of such a traumatic experience.
Yeah, I would say it was really important for me. And just on a personal note, the last year that I was at the organization, my mother was dying and I was caring for her and had been caring for her for the last, few years. And my decision to stay as long as I did, part of it was because I need to care for my mom in the way that would benefit her. And so I really made that decision to say no more once my mom passed, right? And I really set my sights on something bigger. I really do believe, and it's really important for me to have a different type of nonprofit organization. And that's why I really want to move to work in co-leadership, because I also believe in co-leadership. This idea of a single leader is also born out of its antiquated, this idea of a single rainmaker and all of those things, I think, is an antiquated approach to this work. And so I really want to see something different. And so Maven is reflecting that for me, right? Both in the way that I can articulate our values and mission, which I could not do at Insight. I had to be kind of undercover. And to be able to do the work that I know is needed out in the world. And so for me, Maven is two things. One, it's about the deep work of really addressing racial inequities in our economy and looking at intersections and doing that in a way with integrity, doing that in a way of impact and being nimble in the space, right? So that was really, really important to me, and to live in a space of joy, to do this very difficult work, and some of it somewhat depressing, right? So Maven was important for me for that, but I'll conclude by saying it was important to me for the people that I work with. I mean, the people that I worked with stepped away, they walked away with me. I mean, I didn't ask them, obviously, to do that. They all left, which was to me the most amazing thing of this experience, not just me leaving, but 6 other people saying, we're going to walk away as well. So I really want to set a work environment that people can thrive in, and that will have meaning for their lives and their children's lives. To me, that's part of my own legacy, that this is, to me now, some legacy work that I'm thinking about in terms of what am I leaving for the next generation to be able to walk into. That's very important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So walking away and having, a good number of your staff walk away, and then starting the Maven Collective. How did you negotiate your funder relationships in that? And what role did funders play in supporting your leadership?
I'm really feel that I've had amazing funders that I've worked with, program officers. San Francisco Foundation has utterly been amazing. And they really stepped in and stepped up. I mean, what was really, truly amazing about my experience is all of my funders walked away from Insight, all of them. And it really felt, I was just heartfelt around the level of support that I had from funders that I didn't even have come close to in my own board, right? So funders played a big role of really saying that we're not going to support an organization that functions in this way. It wasn't just my treatment, but a board that was not, that lacked governance. right? That didn't take responsibility, that did not meet, that did not really follow the standards, some level of standards of a governance structure. So those funders use their pocketbooks to say, you know, we stand for something more than that, you know. So that was really important. And to me, partnering with funders, not just getting money and having it come to your org, but really being in partnership and relationship as much as I can. And I have to say, many of my funders are women, meaning my program officers, really made all the difference. And it's something that we've always believed in, and being in relationship with funders.
Thank you. And that's so important. You know, at LeaderSpring, we also partner very deeply with the San Francisco Foundation and the Women of Color, Women of Power initiative that's supporting our Lead Strong initiative to work with women of color in leadership and in ascending leadership over the next 11 years, you know, specifically and really intentionally. And I love when you spoke about the new structure that you're taking on, because in the nonprofit industrial complex, you know, we walk into these positions and we just kind of adopt the structure that exists without really interrogating, does this work for me? Does this work for the people, you know, that I'm working with? And so at LeaderSpring, we've taken on a liberatory framework and a distributive leadership model as well. Co-directorship, we just named co-directorships this year. You know, the organization is 20 years old. And we really believe that there's a different way to do this that is healthier, that's saner, that's in relationship with, that's collaborative, and that just really nourishes who we are as human beings, you know, just a more humanistic structure. So, you know, I really, really love where you're going and what you're doing with the Maven Collective, and wish you much luck and gratitude. How do we identify red flags and avoid the pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of your red flags may come early, right? They may come in how you enter.
Yes.
I'm not saying a contract solves all problems, it doesn't, but that could tell you something in terms of the willingness and how that's negotiated. I think it's, you know, really walking in with the salary that you deserve. You know, if that's a problem, then that you're going to see some issues there. And how are you actually, you know, are folks really being straightforward about what you're facing when you walk in, right? If a lot is hidden from you and you walk in and say, oh my goodness, right, I had no idea, that might tell you something about the way that, you know, the organization is functioning in terms of transparency and governance. So I think some of those signs are early. And one of the biggest ones, I think, is what happens when you start to want to make changes. Are you really starting to see a great deal of resistance? And I, you know, I'll just say from my own experience in talking to other executive directors and presidents that are Black women, I don't know one that hasn't come across a board member who's trying to undermine her, not one. For people who have been pushed out, to people who are still in their organizations, but had to then try to remove a person who was really undermining their leadership, right? It happens very frequently. So I think really seeing what that looks like early on, really assessing who here is truly here to support me, it will tell you how this can actually transpire in the tenure of your tenure at the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And one thing that I've seen just in our cohorts, and we're currently in our 4th Lead Strong cohort. I know my colleagues are on the call, correct me if I'm wrong. And what we're seeing is that women are coming out of our cohort experience, you know, with this self-assurance that I can do other things. I can do whatever I need to do. I don't have to, my grandson just walked in. I don't have to be subjected to inequities, to hurtful circumstances, to unorthodox circumstances. And so, just being able to witness women of color in their power and in their glory is, one of the main takeaways from our Lead Strong program. I want to see if there's any questions from our participants that are with us today. I know that you and I are on the main screen, so I can't see who's out there. But do folks want to turn on their cameras and join the conversation if they have any comments or questions for Anne that they want to put forward? And you can just unmute yourself since I can't see everyone. Any questions or comments?
I do
Hi,
have a question.
Anne. Oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
hi. This is Deborah Gorman with the Greenlighting Institute, and the Insight Center was located in our building. We own a building, and we have other nonprofits who are here. And as another demonstration of solidarity, we kicked Insight Center out. We said this is, they had 2 more years on the lease, and we had a discussion with the leadership, and we said, while we don't know the full story, we just feel that the way that you have treated your leadership was inappropriate, and so they have since been removed out of our building. So and Anne and I had met separately and had a conversation, and we weren't going to stand for it either. So I think there are different ways that you could demonstrate your solidarity, and how those boards can recognize that what you do impacts the full community. That you're not just attacking one person or even that staff, you're attacking the whole community. So I just want to share that, we may be in different places, but that we can support each other regardless of the circumstances in a way that can hopefully impact, I'm hoping, that future board leadership. So I just wanted to add that voice and say that, I'm so grateful that you're sharing this story, and I too have had a board that treated me not so fairly and not so kindly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Deborah. And I think that's another thing that's really important. And another reason for Lead Strong is that we want to create communities of women that are supporting each other, that are sharing their stories, because sometimes we feel like we're the only ones going through it. We feel isolated, and particularly when you're in a leadership position, you feel, wow, who do I turn to? Where's my village? Where's my people? I see Rakiba's hand is raised. Rakiba?
Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation. Nice to see you both. Nice to see you, Anne. Nice to see you, Sonia. I'm thinking about the political environment in this country that constantly finds ways to insert wedges to separate people of color, when we often have more in common than we do apart. And there is a need for multiracial solidarity to secure the kind of policy change that I think many of us are aspiring towards. And so my question for Anne is, what are the policies and strategies that you at the Maven Collaborative are advancing to build greater multiracial solidarity and begin to blunt those wedges that drive us apart and counteract the dynamics that were present on your board?
Yes, I strongly believe in multiracial solidarity, and that's the only way we're going to address the issues that we're facing in this country. And that work isn't easy. I know that I've talked a lot about addressing anti-Blackness because I feel like it's a way for us to begin to build solidarity. It may not seem it's the most comfortable way, but one of the things that I actually did was I had some funding and I actually just granted it out to a colleague, a Latina colleague of mine who had a dream of building popular education, and that's the work that she's done around anti-Blackness in the Latino community as a Latina, as an immigrant. And she's been able to actually do this work, do it cross-national with folks in El Salvador and pilot it in the Deep South. And she's like, you know, she's been telling me that it's just been taking off, that people actually want this kind of curriculum, right? And I was just heartened by it, because a lot of times I heard that, you know, this is uncomfortable, it's too hard to address, but it's something that we can actually build together. I have to also think that you know, there is joy in all of our work across culture, and we can find those places of joy together. And when we think about kind of trying to address some of these root issues that will free us to be in community together, I think it's so important. So that's just one way. I think that's one way that we've thought about this, and want to see others who can go out and do this work in the community and do kind of movement building work, have the resources to do this. No one was going to give her money for this. But I was glad to give some of our funding to her, and now she's going to be able to garner greater funding for it, and do the work that feels so personal to her. So I think that's one thing that we're really trying to think about. How do we do it from the place that we're set, that we're not a movement building organization, right? So how do we do that with our partners? And that's something we're thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rakiba. Catherine Canton, my colleague over at LeaderSpring, has a wonderful question to put forth. And then Cynthia, I see you have your hand up next.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Sonia and Anne. I came in a little late, apologies. But just everything you've been sharing already, I'm like, oh, like my heart and resonance, and yeah, and appreciating hearing a little bit more about what you're working on now. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about like how you built or continue to build your like community of counsel or advisors, or you know, that group of folks that just hold you and see you when all of this, right, when these moments come off and you're like, what is happening? So I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about like how you built that space back then or now, how you cultivate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. You know, I think being in a leadership position can be so isolating, right? I mean, some of the things that you're dealing with are very internal. There's things that you obviously can't reveal. You need people who can hold your truths and confidence. And that can be challenging, right? So I think one thing that's so important to me is having those peers, those trusted peers, where you can pick up the phone and say, am I crazy? I'm gonna tell you just what happened. Or what do you think I should do? Have you experienced this before, right? And we don't really, these get born somewhat naturally, or you have to build these over years and determine. I mean, I've had some places where my trust was betrayed, you know, and something was revealed that I did not want revealed. So it can be challenging, but also so beautiful once you're able to do it. And there's so many wonderful leaders out there. I don't think that we really think about investing in that kind of peer kind of support. I think we need sometimes curated spaces where we can be together, and you build these curated spaces. I just came from some wonderful gatherings as part of a leadership group last month that I thought, now this is care, like this is true care. And this is a way that you build relationships with people. I think that's so important. I also I don't think it does happen. I realized how much support I did have. I mean, I had an outpouring of just support, and I was so heartened. I was just like humbled by the support I had. And sometimes we don't even realize what support we do have, right? But I think if you're trying to be in a relationship with people, it really matters. And it really mattered more than anything to hear from people. I mean, as part of this, a group of researchers wrote a letter where 20 of them signed this letter that was sent to my board. they took this on their own. I was taken aback. So I think that that support can come in so many places, but you need it in all those places. You know, you need it with your funders, you need it with your peers. It makes all the difference in the world. You need a coach. You know, all those things really matter to keep you grounded and to keep you whole while you're dealing with such, you know, just the day in and day out of being a leader.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. We're going to go to Cynthia and then Jessamine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Sonia and Anne and everyone on this call. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting this. Anne, I really appreciate your bravery, your courage, your boldness to share your story so powerfully and commit your career at this place towards this critical topic. I really also appreciate your focus on co-leadership. I know as LeaderSpring has moved forward with, as Sonia mentioned, is fantastic. And the joy, the focus on bringing joy to our career, our lives. I want to ask you, I kind of want to dissect some of what you shared in two ways and ask you to speak to them. One is about the board chair and the executive director relationship. Clearly, your chair had a big, as you mentioned, had a big central play in how everything shook out for you. And so I wonder if you could share with us what kind of support were you able to secure? Like, did you ever seek a mediator, a facilitator, a coach? I'm partly asking this because as a leadership coach myself, I've been invited by actually a LeaderSpring agency to help them build. We just transitioned to a new executive director, and for the past 6 months, every week we've had meetings to facilitate a trusting, safe, productive relationship between the board chair and the ED. So the power of that, because as we all, most of us know in this sector, at least I strongly believe the most important relationship of any organization, social impact organization, is the ED and the board chair. So would love to hear, when things were going south there, were you able to get any kind of support, maybe even to move to a different board chair? So I think a lot of it ends up being personality based. Now, on that point, I want to separate out to the larger social, systemic issues of our times, race being one of them, and particularly Black-Brown relationships. I mean, I agree that there's a lot of examples where we're not seeing the kind of, it's everywhere, right? There's a lot of challenges with Black-Brown relationships, and there are growing numbers of good, productive, powerful Black-Brown relationships happening in this country. So I just wonder if you've explored the possibility of lifting those as well. Those are a couple of thoughts and questions that are sparking in me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Cynthia. I think you raised some good questions. I think that board chair and ED relationship is the most essential relationship, right? That person is your conduit, to the board writ large, to your support. It's an extremely important relationship. And I will just say that I'm in relationship with an ED who is Latina, who we are in deep relationship with one another. I am really there to support her. And, I know some of the same issues I'm fighting for her that I fought for myself. Low pay, undervalued, not understanding even what she faces, especially as an immigrant Latina in the world. Someone didn't even want to rent to her organization once they saw her face, right? And to say to the board, you understand these are the things she's dealing with. It's very different than what other folks would have to deal with. So really having that person who can be your advocate, who can speak to, up for you, who can help smooth over relationships, who can support your vision, help articulate that vision to others, it's essential. Now, in my case, this person had been board chair prior to me coming on, had been board chair for maybe 13 years and was never going to relinquish that role.
There
Never.
you go. That's a big sign right
Never
there. Yeah.
going to relinquish that role. And, I'm talking about issues, and some people would say to me, oh, this is a personality issue. You two are just butting heads. And I'm like, no, this is structural, right? And I think the idea, when we say something is just personal, then you don't have to deal with it. Then it's something on you. But to say we don't have the right structures in place to make decisions, like no one should be chair that long, right? Why don't we have board elections? That's structural. That's governance. That's not about personality, right? And so I think the inability to look at those structures sometimes just gets pushed to personality. There could be personality conflicts as well, but I still like to say, let's look at what's deeply structural, and we can deal with personality issues. So that board chair role is so critical, and making sure as a leader that you can get the board chair who will be that person, because when you don't have that, I can't get anything accomplished. Oh, I tried everything. Lawyers, mediators, consultants, other tactics. Believe you, people would say, hey, I have an idea. And I'm like, I know. I've tried that idea. I've tried every idea that was possible. And I think that's the thing about people, that leaders are not protected. We have very few protections. We either, if you can't negotiate something, you probably leave, right? I mean, you just don't. I didn't have protections from abuse. None. Not one. So it really showed me we have it for staff, we have it, but we don't have it for leaders. Especially if you have that, the board chair is your issue, right? Where do you go? Where do you go when the board chair puts her own people on the board? So they're really reporting to her. Where do you go? These things should never happen. So, I would say I had somewhat unusual circumstance, but I think that relationship is just essential to success, the success of you as a leader and your organization.
Term limits are critical, absolutely. So what about the Black-Brown piece that I mentioned? I'm thinking about the Marguerite Casey Foundation that puts an award out every year honoring public partnerships or social impact collaboratives where Black and Brown communities are really making a difference. So I wonder if you anything you want to share about what you're seeing, and possibly any strategies to promoting Black and Brown partnerships that are productive and successful.
I mean, I just mentioned one and one too, where this is actually the person
Yes, yeah, you did.
But I think the thing about it is that how we built this relationship, right? How we really started with our core values, how we started with really like the world we're trying to see, right? And, get to some of the things that get in the way of us being able to build work together. And I think having those truths and having that willingness is so important. And I mean, to me, there's just so much alignment. There's so much alignment, right? We have to get past some barriers. But when you have that alignment and you have that commitment, I think the relationship is really quite wonderful. And I really feel that with the relationship I have with United for a Fair Economy. And really see it like we said, we want to be a model of how this could be. It's been very difficult for us to do it because of the board, and I'm board chair of a board that I feel doesn't support our leader, So it's quite possible. I have my co-president is a brown person, not Latina, but a South Asian woman who is brown. And we talk about these issues all of the time. We even talk about how we're both seen, how we're situated, all of those things like that. We can really, really understand how to move together in the world. And so I think there's something quite beautiful about it if we really invest our energy there and do the work that needs to be done, and some of that beauty will really unfold. I think there's some of my best relationships are with the two people I just named.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that. We have two more questions, Jessamine and Hema. And I want to just take a poll. If folks can just in the chat, let me know how much time they have, because we wanted to do breakout groups, but I don't want to lose folks. So if you can just send us a chat, if you are able to stay for a half an hour, or if you have to leave at 1, that way we can determine, what's next. Go ahead, Jessamine.
Thank you. It's Jessamine Sabag.
Jessamine.
Nice to see you, Sonia, and Anne too. I've been following your journey, Anne, for a long time through my friend Yvonne Yan Liu, who you work closely with. And some of the things that strike me, well, I'm so excited that you were able to garner the power in this situation from the multiple sources of support that you had, to, get out of there, bring amazing people with you, and create something that is more of like values aligned and more of what we need in the world, especially that speaks to the leadership of powerful women of color and Black women such as yourself. One of the things, I'm the new senior director of the Power Pathway at San Francisco Foundation. And one of the things that I have spent many decades thinking about is is like building power to change systems and structures. And I think that often we can hear a story such as yours and think about it as like you are one person. This is a story of individual empowerment, but it is living within much larger systems and structures. And so I would love and really value hearing your reflections on how this experience built power and has led towards some opportunities to do some of that systems and structural change.
Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you, Jessamine. I wanted to, when this happened, I first wanted to talk to foundations in terms of systems and how they think about supporting organizations. And to say that, one, we've had this outsized focus on diversity, but we don't look deeper than that. What's the composition of your board? And that's one very, very minor indicator of how leadership is supported. It may mean absolutely nothing. In my case, it meant nothing. You could look at it and say, look at you, you have this great diversity. And so how can you think about asking different questions? How can you think about asking different questions when you ask us for information? That you ask us for a slew of information. I don't know if you ever look at that information, but you asked. So what if you asked us more about functioning, governance? What if you really change your systems to look a little different in the way that you gather information and what you do with it once you have it? That would be something really, really important to me. I still think this is a journey, right? This is not about my individual story and why I did this. I could do this because I didn't have to sign an NDA. That's why I could do it. And so many of those that had to sign an NDA can't speak out about what happened to them. So I know this is the experience of many people, but what systems, what do we need to change, right? I think that we need the things I mentioned about foundations and how they can do things differently. I think there are ways that organizations could look at leadership in different ways and even have, I don't want to say a checklist, but really have a playbook of are they doing the things that really look like you have a healthy organization that supports a leader, a woman leader, a woman of color leader, a person of color leader. Are there ways that we can kind of push on this in a more systemic way? The stories have been out there. The data is clear. Now we need to change the way that we function, and we need to change some of the underlying systems that support us. And to me, that's the work, right? And I would love to see us organize, just like we organize around a lot of other things, to change the way this functions for the next generation. I have people say, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to lead, or look what happened to you. I'm looking at you right now. I've had more young people say, I don't want to do this, because they see how rotten it is at times, right? It's soul sucking, right? We have to make things better. We have to like disrupt the system in the nonprofit. We're so busy on the outside world. We're talking about other people's jobs. We're talking about jobs. I talk about jobs, but we don't look at this as a sector. This is a sector of jobs. And we don't put the energy there. We don't put resources there. We think about leadership in ways sometimes are really antiquated. Like you just go to a leadership training. It just doesn't, we need to be thinking in much different ways, and we need systems of support to enable us to do it and to really see the change we're trying to make. Because we really haven't moved towards anything. As Sonia talked about, these, walking into these organizations. What has truly, I've been working in this field for 35 years. There's nothing fundamentally different in the way that it functions and the way that we think about leadership. I mean, I think there's been a lot of great, more recent work and push by people of color. But I mean, in terms of the expectations and the structures themselves, you've got to kind of, come in and break some things down. And that is threatening the status quo, and that's challenging. So yes, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that this is long-term work, but we've got to get to work. We've hardly gotten to work on this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for that. We are going to lose more than half of our participants. So I want to turn it over to Michelle for some announcements. So folks, hang on, don't leave yet. And this was a wonderful conversation. Appreciate all your words of wisdom. And we will definitely be in touch with you. Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Okay, look, this was my thing. When you said disrupt the system, I was like, yes, finally. I'm all about disruption. So we want to thank Anne and her team. And I really want to give a shout out to Anjali, who worked with us to get this on the books. So you all got all the nuggets. I was taking notes, all of the resources. So now how do you put them into action? I dropped something in the chat for you guys to participate in and share with your networks around LeaderSpring's equity series, Executive Transition Impact and Opportunity. It's July 19th. You guys share that, click on that link, participate. But this has been such a rich conversation. And we need to do something about it. Our ancestors disrupted the system. Our ancestors changed the system. We just need to stop being punks. I'm sorry, y'all. My West Oakland is coming out. The Lower Bottoms is coming out right now. So we just need to get in there where there's lots of people, there's lots of power. So let's do this for the women of color. I want to thank LeaderSpring Center and Sonia and her team. And I want to thank our trustees. I want to thank the San Francisco Foundation staff, our power team, Senior Director Jessamine Sabag, who was here with us, and our VP of Programs, Rakiba Lebre, and all of our staff who were participating. All of our participants, we are women of color. We are women of power. If we want to see the change, be the change maker. How many of our ancestors told us we were the change maker? So listen, you guys, this was an opportunity. If you drive an electric car, then you plugged into the electricity. If you drive a 1990 car like I do, you went and got you some unleaded gas. This is an opportunity for us to recharge ourselves, get back on the freeway, disrupt the system, make the change, and just remember, we have to make the change together. We have to do this as a collective. And that is why the San Francisco Foundation is so excited about the Womxn of Color, Womxn of Power, and the story that Anne shared. And remember, you have to share your story, because if we don't share our stories, we think we're doing this in isolation and in silence. The only way that we can become a collective and support each other and build the data that is necessary is to share our stories. There is great richness and fruit in storytelling. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Anne, for sharing your story and being
making that courageous decision to put yourself out there, be under the spotlight. But listen, we got you. All you got to do is send us a text or email. We got you. We're going to show up, you guys. Have a great, outstanding day, you guys. And thank you again for joining us. I think everybody.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Nice to meet everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. This was wonderful.